Let's take a look next at career effectiveness. We're going to look at one dimension of this we call influence. We spent much of the last 20 years studying hundreds of people who were identified by their peers as supremely influential. These are the ones who could really get things done. We did this by interviewing about 20,000 people and asking them to identify 3 of their peers that fit that description. We took the names of all those who were nominated, tallied them up, and noticed a common pattern. First of all, a lot of people were identified once. No surprise there, probably most people identified themselves. Secondly, there were a few people that got 4, 5, or 6 nominations. There were a handful of folks that saw them as pretty darn influential. And then there were a few that got 30, 40, or 50 nominations. They were widely perceived as incredibly effective, incredibly influential. So we followed these people around. We tried to understand what separated them from the rest, from the merely good around influence and effectiveness in their organizations. Well, it took us quite a while before we stumbled on the answer. We found that the way they processed their inbox, the way they held meetings, the way they did many of their tasks was not a whole lot different than their peers. One, for example, that we followed around, named Kevin, seemed quite a bit like the other vice presidents in this financial services company. And yet he was the only one of his peers to be identified as extremely influential. As we followed him around, we began to despair until we attended the meeting. The meeting was the culmination of a 6-month study process to determine where the corporate headquarters of this organization should be moved. Pretty important decision. At this final meeting, 3 different study groups were to present their findings from 3 different cities that were under consideration. One was Chicago, another was San Francisco, and the last was Atlanta. The first group to present considered the San Francisco option. They presented their findings, and after they did, the president made an interesting request. The president said, "This is a high-stakes issue. We cannot pull any punches in this next discussion. There is no question that cannot be asked, no stone that should not be turned. Let's dive in." And they did. We were impressed with the level of engagement and candor in the conversation. Then the second group presented. They were looking at Atlanta. We noted in retrospect that the CEO, named Chris, had a lingering Southern accent, the beginnings of trouble. Chris had also been part of the study group for Atlanta. While he didn't present the findings, those who did made their points fairly effectively. Then the questions started to come out. Chris began to answer them. A few moments into the discussion, Chris's finger came up. Then he began leaning forward. Then his voice became a little bit more animated. The pace began to pick up, and an interesting thing started to occur. The questions became a little bit more ginger. People started throwing softballs. And it wasn't long in the conversation before it sounded more like a when conversation about Atlanta than an if. That troubled us. But before we could point that out, Kevin kind of cleared his throat. Interestingly, when he did, it seemed that every muscle in the room tightened. People took a deep breath and held it. It was as though they knew what to expect next. They had been here before with Kevin. What Kevin did next was incredible. In the next few minutes, he essentially said to Chris that while Chris had asked for absolute candor around the discussion, he'd been making subtle use of his power in the previous few minutes to force his view about Atlanta. Now, he didn't say it in those words, and yet the words he chose were very direct. But at the same time, they were completely respectful and supportive of Chris. We were stunned. The rest of the group continued to hold its breath. Chris shook his head as though he was kind of clearing his mind, said, "You're absolutely right. That's exactly what I just did. And that's exactly what just happened in the group. And that is not what I want. I'm sorry. Can we start again?" The rest of the group was a little bit timid, but Kevin dove in. He began to ask questions. Chris responded effectively, and the dialogue engaged. Eventually, the organization moved to Chicago, and it appeared to have been by far the best decision for their particular organization. At the end of that conversation, one of Kevin's peers leaned over to us and said, "If you want to know how Kevin gets things done, if you want to know why he is so supremely influential, figure out what he just did." What we found in our ongoing study of the most influential in organizations is that the difference between the good and the best shows up in how they deal with crucial conversations. There are inevitably, in trying to get things done, some tender and sensitive moments, some risky and high-stakes conversations. The worst around influence run away from them. The good sort of sugarcoat or understate. They'll say a little bit of what they think, but not entirely. The best find a way to be entirely candid and entirely respectful. They get both the result and maintain the relationship. Most of what we've learned about crucial conversations, we learned by watching this astounding group get things done. They earn their pay when it comes to these one or two crucial conversations that make or break influence. So how about you? How about your career? Are there things you're frustrated about not getting done, about not getting through, about not getting heard in your organization? If so, are there one or two crucial conversations that you are not holding or not holding well? Well, let's move next to team. How about team performance? Are there crucial conversations that make or break teams? It turns out that there are. There are a couple. The first is, what happens when the team has a fundamental and serious disagreement around a high-stakes issue with the boss? What do? In many organizations, it sounds a little bit like this.
You know something, guys? I think if we ship by truck, we're going to be just fine.
That's right. Why pay for overnight services?
Absolutely.
Yeah. But is it worth the risk of it arriving late just to save the money, though?
You know what? You're right. I mean, a late delivery would be unacceptable.
Absolutely. Let's pay the additional fee.
Well,
Right.
I didn't mean to imply it wasn't worth it. I was just asking. But on the other hand, though, I don't want to pay for unnecessary fees either.
What were we thinking? I mean, money's too tight to be throwing it away in express shipping.
I'm with you.
Absolutely.
Guys, wait a minute. I have the feeling you're just deferring to me because I'm the boss.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what I'd rather do is just discuss the issues without worrying about who's saying what, okay?
You know what? You're absolutely right. From now on, I'm not going to defer to you anymore.
Me neither.
Right.
Okay.
Starting right now.
Good.
Me too.
So, how am I doing?
How about me?
Now, that was a silly and a little bit over-the-top issue, but let me ask you a heart-to-heart question here. Can you remember times, even recently, where you said less than you think to someone in a position of authority? Are there times when you felt you had to choose between maintaining the relationship and speaking your mind? The difference between the good and the best in terms of team effectiveness is what happens when the team has an important disagreement with the boss. Do they sugarcoat? Do they understate? Do they hold back? Do they go to silence entirely? Are there entire topics that are undiscussable in the team? Those are predictors of worst or merely good performance in the team. In the best teams, they get to dialogue. That's the first of the two crucial conversations for team effectiveness. The second is, what happens when a peer is irritating a peer? What happens when a peer lets down a peer? In the worst organizations, again, they'll do one of two things. Either hit and run. They either come in and squabble and squawk and then walk away, not engaging in a serious problem-solving conversation, or they go to silence. They resent them. They work around them. In the good organizations, they wait for the boss to handle it. They hope and pray that the boss is watching and that in some performance review, this incompetent person is going to get handled. In the best organizations, peers challenge peers. At the point and moment of challenge, they step up to the crucial conversation. In the most effective teams, there's not just one Kevin, there's a team of Kevins. They're a team of individuals who are capable of challenging the boss and challenging each other. By doing so, they solve the problems that could become divisive, that could become wedges in the team, or fundamentally limit its performance and effectiveness. Now let's move, lastly, to relationships. How about intimate relationships, family relationships, between loved ones, with children, with teenagers even? Are there a couple of crucial conversations that make or break those? For this, we're going to look not at our own research, but that of a couple of scholars named Markman and Notarius. They looked at marriage literature and research to try to determine what the predictors of happiness and success, endurance even, in a marriage were. They found that there was almost no research done in this area, so they began conducting their own. They brought couples in and had them fill out surveys identifying themselves as either really happy, very satisfied with their relationship, or a little bit troubled, or somewhere in between, let's say at good. Then they started to study them. They watched them. One interesting thing they did as part of their research was to bring them into a room and turn on a video camera. They ask them to talk about, for maybe 45 minutes, a subject they have a hard time discussing. In our words, a crucial conversation. Then they reviewed the videos, they coded, they observed, and then they followed these couples for a period of months and years afterwards. They found that they could predict with 90% accuracy which couples would be happy and together in the next 5 years and those who would be divorced by looking at just a few minutes of a crucial conversation. Staggering. The difference between the good and the best is not how much they have in common. Every couple ends up having differences. The question is not whether you come from the same race, the same socioeconomic, the same religious, the same values background. None of those predicted happiness and success in a relationship. The question is what happens when differences emerge. Can you get to dialogue? Can you have a healthy and productive conversation? Or do you move to something that sounds like this?
Can we talk about what just happened?
No, I don't have 6 hours to spare.
Is that supposed to be some kind of a cheap shot?
Duh. You're not happy unless you analyze everything to death. I mean, can't you just let go whatever it is that's bothering you?
You never give me a chance to talk about anything. As far as you're concerned, 2 beers and a roll in the hay and all our problems are over.
Works for me.
Well, it doesn't work for me. I want to talk about the way you treat me when I drive.
Jesus, just go to our separate corners, all right?
I pick you up, we pull out, and immediately you start in on me. Shift down, turn so fast on the right. You're driving on the gravel. You drive me nuts. And what's worse yet, it's insulting. You treat me like a child.
Well, excuse me if I care about the car.
More than you care about me.
At least the car treats me well.
Oh, and you treat me so well. You with your cheap shots and endless sarcasm.
It's my only weapon against your incessant whining.
It isn't whining, it's called conversation, but you wouldn't know about that because they don't have that on SPN.
It's ESPN, you twit!
Oh, isn't that perfect? Our marriage is falling apart and you're correcting my
No.
spelling?
Our marriage isn't falling apart. It fell apart 6 months ago when you started your endless campaign on how I needed to stop spending so much money. Oh, I'm sorry, dear. Did I buy the large Slurpee for lunch? What was I thinking? It's like being married to an accountant.
That is the meanest thing anyone's ever said to me. You take that back right now.
CPA!
Come on, take that
CPA!
back right now.
What did you hear? If you listen very closely, you probably heard a couple of patterns. During crucial conversations at home, some try to move to silence, some move to violence, some become aggressive and controlling in the conversation, trying to move towards the objective that they care most about. Both of those are predictors of divorce and dissatisfaction in a relationship. So how about you? Are there relationships that matter a lot to you? Are there ones that you'd like to improve? If so, are there a couple of crucial conversations that you're not holding or not holding well? Our promise to you is that if you identify those and if you seriously attempt to apply even a few of these skills, you will see progress. You will see the benefits accrue to you in that relationship. In conclusion, crucial conversations are a lever that moves your world. The question is this lever working for you or against you? Engage seriously in what we share with you here, and you will have what you need to move not only relationships, but teams and even entire organizations toward greater vitality. We've talked about the supreme importance of crucial conversations. That alone would be reason enough to make a serious study of how we handle them. But it gets worse. You see, not only are these the conversations that matter the most, but what is also true is that when it matters the most, we tend to do our worst. We drag out our rustiest, bluntest instruments and go to work. During these same encounters, the best shine. As we'll see, when it matters the most, the best master the moment, and by so doing make dramatic progress, where the rest of us become our own worst enemies. First, let's take a look at an example of how that happens, and then we'll talk about why. A dear friend came to me who was troubled in his marriage and said, "I'd really like some help." I told him I wasn't a marriage counselor, was not qualified for that. He says, "I'm not looking for one. We've been to those." He said, "I just need someone I can talk to." I said, "That I can do." So we talked a little bit, and ultimately I asked him, "Well, what do you want that you're not getting?" He thought about it for a moment and he said, I just want her to be supportive and friendly and respectful towards me. That's what I want. And she's not. She just nags and harps and so on. So I did what I do in our consulting work. I said, well, let's go to that critical moment and find out what happened. So take me back to the last time when she was being critical and nagging and harping. What did you do? He thought about it again for a moment and he said, well, I withdraw. I kind of pull back and I'm cold. He says, I know that irritates her and it bugs her, and so that's what I do. I said, okay, and how did it work? He said, not particularly well. I said, how long have you been trying that? He said, about 18 years. Well, next I talked to his wife. She was also a dear friend. I asked her, what do you want that you're not getting? She said, I want him to be communicative, to be warm, to be affectionate with me, and he's not. He's cold, he's aloof, he's withdrawn. I said, all right, take me back to the last time that he was not being what you want him to be. What did you do? She thought and said, I nag, I call names, I'm sarcastic, I insult him. I said, and how did it work? She said, not particularly well. And I said, and how long have you been doing it? About 18 years. These two dear friends had engaged in this pattern of behaving in ways that were guaranteeing they would not get what they want. Why is that? Crucial conversations have 3 ingredients. The first is that we anticipate that others will have opposing opinions. Our expectation of opposition produces enormous consequences on how we behave, how we engage in these conversations. The second is, these are high-stakes issues. These are not about spinach in your teeth or toilet paper stuck to your shoe. These are important, visceral issues. Finally, there are strong emotions. Those are the 3 ingredients of a crucial conversation: opposing opinions, strong emotions, and high stakes. It turns out that when we engage in conversations that have those 3 ingredients, we tend to do our worst. These 2 intelligent, skillful individuals that were dear friends of mine, when under the spell of those 3 ingredients, pulled out their rustiest, bluntest communication instruments and went to work. One went to silence, the husband in this case. One went to violence, became controlling and aggressive, and neither of them got what they want for 18 years. Why does this occur? It turns out that our bodies are perfectly designed to screw up our crucial conversations. We have a stress reaction when we anticipate talking with someone who will oppose us, when there are strong emotions and high stakes involved. In that stress reaction, 2 small organs seated neatly atop our kidneys spill adrenaline into our bloodstream. That creates a predictable response. Certain things start to occur very naturally when just a teaspoonful of adrenaline is added to our bloodstream. One is that the body begins to divert blood to different parts of the body, ones that it deems most important for the confrontation at hand. Those turn out to be some of the large muscle groups. So your legs get favored, your arms get favored. Why is that? Well, this reaction was designed for helping us deal with ferocious animals, with physical threats. So if a saber-toothed tiger were to leap into the middle of whatever room or automobile you're in right now, your body would prepare you perfectly to deal with that. What are your 2 options? One is to hit it really hard. Wouldn't it be nice to have the muscles in your arms metabolizing at about 10 times their normal rate at a time like that? The second option is to run really fast. If you look around the room and conclude that you're faster than at least one of the other people in the room, running might be an effective approach. Unfortunately, the body has to come up with all of this extra blood by taking it away from other areas, ones that it deems less important. One of the areas that is deemed less important is the higher functioning centers of the brain. Literally, higher reasoning centers of your brain are starved for blood and either decrease in performance or shut down entirely during this stress reaction. So here you are. You're facing a complex social problem with the same set of skills that you would use to deal with a ferocious animal. And how do you behave? Like an animal. Like an idiot. I don't mean that personally because I'm describing myself at the same time. Have you ever found yourself in the middle of a crucial conversation with a loved one, opposing opinions, strong emotions, high stakes. And in the middle of that conversation, you thought to yourself, yeah, maybe if I just made a really keen, sarcastic comment, that will bring them to their senses. They'll see the light and come around to my point of view. Now, in your quiet contemplation right now, that might seem irrational. But let's be honest for a moment. Has it ever seemed like maybe that might work? Has it ever felt so emotionally right that you actually let loose with one and then were stunned to find that they were angry back at you? Have you ever thought that maybe if you just continue the cold shoulder for a little longer, then they'll feel sympathy for you and they'll come over and comfort you and give you what you want? Somehow we start to believe that silence and violence, that avoidance and attacking, that fight or flight might be effective approaches in these complex social problems. Why is that? Because we are left with the same mental capacity as a baboon during these stressful encounters. When it matters most, we do our worst. So here's the horrible irony. During these most pivotal conversations of our lives that matter the most to our organizations, our teams, our careers, and even our personal relationships, we're drunk on adrenaline, dumbed down, and accessing the worst skill set that we have available. And here's the powerful promise. If we can change how we deal with these highest leverage conversations, the potential benefits are enormous.